It's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
He's the author of a new book. It's called South of the Clouds. We've got the Amazon link for you. We're going to show it to you here in just a minute. His name is John D. Kuhns. He's a businessman. He's taken 6 companies from inception to their IPOs. From 2007 to 2012, he owned and operated a silicon smelter, like the one in his book, South of the Clouds. And he's currently the CEO of a company mining gold in Bougainville, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, an island in the South Pacific. John Kuhns, welcome to the program, sir. Thanks so much for coming on.
Hi, Paul. Thanks for having me.
Yes, sir. Really, really excited to have you on. I want to talk a little bit about China and the events of the day. But first, I'd love to talk about your book, South of the Clouds, just from the description on Amazon. I haven't read it, but I understand, you know, this is a fictional tale about somebody who lost everything in the recession and decided to seek his fortune in China. Is that correct?
That's correct, and it's based on real life events. As you mentioned, I owned and operated a similar silicon smelter right along the Sino-Burmese border, and basically I got the plot outline for the novel when I discovered my workers smuggling jade over the border. So that's kind of where the story came from.
Wow. Well, I certainly want to encourage our listeners out there to check it out. It's up at Amazon, South of the Clouds, and I think it's just really fascinating to have a businessman of your stature who has been so successful on the program. John, I'd like to know, what is your take on, for somebody who's, had such an experience over in that part of the world. What's your take on what's going on right now with China? I mean, I've got a New York Times article here that says that this trade war, President Trump trying to get in a better position to negotiate. I understand negotiations are taking place, according to the last headline that I saw. But they're saying it's rattling China's leaders. I've heard other articles there are cracks within the Communist Party. What are your thoughts on this, John?
Yeah, well, first of all, I should say I've been doing business in China since 1984. I do consider myself, even though I'm not Chinese and will never really understand their culture because, I'm not from there, I consider myself an expert on China. Having said that, I actually think Mr. Trump is doing exactly the right thing. He's doing something that our leaders should have done a while back. Now, we all understand that when a country gets beaten down by war, and what they called World War II in China was not World War II, but they called it the War of Japanese Aggression for obvious reasons. And China was really struggling, and so we needed to help pick them up by encouraging trade, and we've been a great trade customer with them ever since. But today, things have gotten out of hand. The arrangements should have been restructured much earlier. And in terms of China, they are very smart people. They're looking to take advantage of any weakness they see in us. So it's something we've got to pay a lot of attention to. Now, one thing you did mention in terms of instability. I mean, the biggest thing that the leaders in China worry about is instability, because instability could topple that arrangement that they've set up there with the Chinese Communist Party, 65 million people ruling 1.5 million people. So economic stability is very important in China, and I think Mr. Trump knows that. I think he's going to win at this set of negotiations. I think he's winning now, and I think it's actually high time.
That's very encouraging to hear. I mean, I know certainly a lot of Americans are, just for the first time figuring out things like, China steals $600 billion a year in intellectual property. Here in this state of Arkansas, we're broadcasting over several stations here in the state of Arkansas. A couple of weeks ago, we had 2 Chinese nationals indicted for stealing our rice technology. And so that was a big story. And so people are starting to realize, okay, hang on a second. China may not be benign, and we also do business in a lot of ways. Like this, for example, let me just kind of tell you this, John. The state of Arkansas is trying to get Chinese companies to come here. Our government is with taxpayer money and incentives and everything else, and a lot of that's on hold now because of the Trump tariffs. But it kind of dawned on me one time when I heard President Trump at the NATO meeting say it doesn't make any sense for Germany to want protection from Russia, from NATO, if they're inking a pipeline deal with Russia, and making Russia richer when they're afraid of them. And that's kind of the way I see it now. What are your thoughts on that, considering that the FBI and the CIA are kind of warning about China trying to supplant the United States?
Oh, listen. Well, first of all, we got to remember, in 1800, China was unquestionably around the world the leading civilization. A lot of people don't realize that, but they realize it, and they feel like the next 150 years were lost. They feel also a real chip on their shoulder against the West, because Western countries, including the United States, but it was really more Great Britain and Germany and France, went into China and essentially took advantage of their weak state. They want that all back, Paul. So first of all, that's ingrained in their culture, number one. Number two, Chinese people are very, very smart, very intelligent, but they are not innovators. They do not do well coming up with stuff themselves. So there's also a culture there of get the IP, get the intellectual property from other people by any means you can, if you want our civilization, that is the China civilization, to be a leading civilization. So those things, you're absolutely right. We got to pay attention to that now, and we have to be essentially vigilant. And I think for far too long we weren't. I think we can right the ship. I think, like I say, Mr. Trump is going to win this round with these guys, but it's going to be an ongoing process.
Yeah, it certainly is an ongoing process. So we have this economic situation going on because of President Trump, really kind of handling the situation like a business, saying, hey, listen, I got to get these guys back to the negotiating table. That's what the tariffs are for. What about the military, though? What's the military mindset? The whole South China Sea thing, expanding, that's got a lot of people concerned as well.
Oh, look, if anything, they should be more concerned about what you just said than the economic situation. I mean, economics, people will find a way to get along, okay? Everybody, in the end, wants to just make money and be successful. Militarily, there's a whole different issue. And again, it goes back to that, hey, we want to be the number one civilization on Earth. The South China Sea, I think, in the long run, not economics, but the South China Sea is the biggest threat we have between the two countries. I mean, it's interesting to point out, the islands that they're taking over and putting defense installations on are as far away from, let's say, Miami as South America. In other words, that is a real stretch to go all the way down to the bottom of the South China Sea and say, this is our territory and we're going to arm these areas. I mean, what's up with that?
Yeah, it's like they think, well, it's got our name in it, so obviously it's all got to be ours. It's the South China Sea. That's very worrisome. You see those photos, those aerial photos of the artificial islands and the airstrips and everything like this. And we have this article here from a couple of days ago where China fired 6 warning shots to the United States Navy in the South China Sea. This is China leave immediately. I mean, they certainly are. I like to contrast this, John. We're talking with John Kuhns. He's the author of the book South of the Clouds. If right now there's all this Russia hysteria, and I'm not saying Russia's benign by any means, but, I mean, what they're doing to the South China Sea, I feel like is way worse than what happened with the Crimea. And yet, why is it acceptable because it's not just Arkansas. There are other people who are trying to use American taxpayer dollars to subsidize, Chinese companies to come here. And yet, if you were to say we're going to do that with Russian companies, I think people would just lose their minds. But it's okay to do it with China. Why do you think that is?
Honestly, Paul, I think it's a holdover of the whole Cold War thing that, really paralyzed this nation for, several decades in the past century. I think people are used to thinking about Russia as the bad guy and the enemy and the big old bear. And I think getting the idea of somebody else like China, I think, is a stretch for some people, but they should be much more concerned today about China than Russia. Or let's face it, Russia economically is a paper tiger.
Yeah, I've been told that before. I mean, it's not even it's just a fraction of what China represents and everything else.
Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate your thoughts, John Kuhns, author of the book South of the Clouds. Can you tell us just a little bit about, when I introduced you, in your bio, it talks about, taking 6 companies from inception to their IPOs from 2007 to 2012. You owned this silicon smelter, and of course your book you said it was based on like a real world experience in the Great Recession. Can you tell us what happened to you in the Great Recession?
Well, pretty much like the guy in the South of the Clouds, I was making a lot of money, and then all of a sudden I wasn't. And what ended up happening is I actually did go to the jungle in the Burmese China area there, and in the far southwest corner of China, and remake another fortune. So the book is essentially patterned on what happened to me in real life.
That's great. Well, I definitely want to give it a read. I hope the people out there will give it a read as well. It's up on Amazon, folks. It's very simple. It's South of the Clouds. Go and get it now. And John Kuhns, it's great to know you. It's great to meet you. I'd love to do this again soon sometime, and we'll be following this China story and the developments there, and we would really appreciate your counsel if there's some breaking news.
Okay, Paul, thanks for having me, and anytime. I really enjoyed it.
All righty. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Folks,
Bye-bye.
We're going to take a break, and we're going to be back here in just a moment. This is Conduit News Radio. Thanks so much for being with us.